My daughter invited everyone to her engagement party, everyone but me. When I asked why, she said, "I don't want people thinking I come from someone who fixes tires for a living." I stayed silent, but I never forgot. A year later, her wedding planner quit last minute. She begged for help. I agreed to sponsor the entire wedding, venue, catering, everything. But on the wedding day, the unexpected happened. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Irene Parker from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I used to think I did a good job raising her. Back when it was just the two of us, my hands were always coated in grease and my clothes never quite clean, but I never let her feel like she was missing anything. Her mother walked out when Lily was 5, left a note on the fridge and an empty bank account. And from that day forward, it was me and her against the world. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., drop her off at school, bust my back at the shop until sunset, then come home and make her boxed mac and cheese while she told me about her day like she was reporting to the president. Every science fair project, every soccer game I couldn't make but tried to, every time she fell asleep on the couch waiting for me, I held it all close. She used to say I was her hero. That was before she learned heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes, they smell like motor oil. The first sign she was slipping away came during her first semester of college. It was subtle, nothing dramatic. Just less frequent calls, a kind of stiffness in her voice when I asked about her new friends. I chalked it up to growing pains. After all, she was surrounded by kids with summer homes and ski vacations, while I couldn't even take a weekend off without losing business. When I visited her for Parents' Weekend, I noticed how she introduced me to her roommate with just my name. "This is Tom," instead of "my dad." I smiled anyway, ignored the lump in my throat, and took them both out for overpriced pasta like nothing felt off. I told myself not to read into it. But something about the way she laughed louder at her roommate's jokes than at mine told me I was already on the outside. The real gut punch came a year later, on a humid July evening, when a customer named Janet, who went to church with me and liked to gossip under the guise of concern, mentioned she'd seen pictures of Lily's engagement party online. I blinked, confused. "Engagement party?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. She tilted her head with that faux sweet look and said, "Oh, I thought you'd be there." That night, I scrolled through her fiancé's social media, my heart pounding with every photo. There she was, in a white dress, holding champagne, surrounded by smiling faces. Dozens of them. His family, her college friends, even her mother made an appearance. Everyone but me. My name wasn't in any caption. My face wasn't in a single frame. It was as if I didn't exist. I waited 3 days before calling her. I had to cool down, had to gather the strength not to yell. When she finally answered, she sounded chipper, like she hadn't done anything wrong. "Hey, Dad," she said casually, like she hadn't just cut me out of one of the biggest moments of her life. I asked her, carefully, why I hadn't been invited. There was a pause on the other end. Then she sighed and said, "Dad, I didn't want people thinking I come from someone who fixes tires for a living." That sentence hung in the air like smoke from a burning house. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and said, "Okay." Then I hung up. I went out to the garage, picked up a lug wrench, and worked in silence until my knuckles cracked. What hurt most wasn't the shame in her voice. It was the memory of how proud she used to be. She once brought a classmate to the shop for career day. She used to brag about how I could make any car run like new. I still had a drawing she made in 2nd grade. Me under a car, labeled "My Dad is Strong." But somewhere along the line, the grease-stained hands that built her life became an embarrassment. I stopped looking at the drawing after that phone call. Couldn't bear to see the version of me she used to love. The one she outgrew. In the weeks that followed, I told no one. Not my friend Ray at the shop. Not even Pastor Helen at church when she asked how wedding planning was going. I just nodded and smiled like any other proud father. But every night, I played that sentence over in my head. I don't want people thinking I come from someone who fixes tires. I kept imagining different ways I could have answered. I could have said, Well, you do. Or, maybe if I wore a suit and sat behind a desk, I'd be good enough. But the truth is, silence was the only response that didn't cost me my dignity. That silence became my shield. Then one day, 6 months later, she called. It was abrupt, out of the blue, and for a moment, my chest fluttered with foolish hope. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to say she made a mistake. But her voice was frantic, not remorseful. Dad, the wedding planner just quit. I don't know what to do. We're 6 weeks out, and everything's falling apart. I listened. I didn't speak right away. She started listing problems. The florist backed out. The caterer canceled. The venue had issues with permits. I need help, she said. You always fix things. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the irony. She didn't want people knowing she came from someone who fixed tires. Yet here she was, begging me to fix her wedding. I told her I'd help. I told her not to worry. And I meant it. Not out of spite, or to trap her, but because part of me still believed that maybe, if I showed up for her like always, she'd see me differently. Not as a man with dirty fingernails, but as the father who never once let her down. I told her I'd handle the vendors, the logistics, the payments, put it all under my name, I said. And she did. Every contract, every deposit mine. But deep down, I wasn't the same man who cried in the garage that night. I had changed. My silence was no longer just grief. It was resolve. I should have known she wasn't calling because she missed me. There was no warmth in her voice. No trace of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching reruns of old westerns. Just a stressed-out woman with a to-do list too long to manage and no backup plan. Lily talked fast, panicked, desperate. Not once did she say please. It was all logistics. The venue needs a deposit today. Can you call the rental company? Do you know someone who does lighting? She asked these things like I was a project manager she'd hired, not her father. I listened in silence, then said, yeah, I can handle it. And I did. Every piece of that wedding came together because I made it so. I took her shattered plans and rebuilt them from the ground up. But even as I stepped in to save the day, she still kept me at arm's length. That was the part that got under my skin. You can always feel when someone's ashamed of you, even when they're smiling to your face. Within days, I had calls lined up with caterers, florists, event planners, lighting crews. I tapped into old contacts, people who owed me favors from the shop, vendors I used to help with their vehicles after hours. It felt good to be useful again. I even fronted the cash to book a band Lily had been dying to get, some soft jazz group with a trendy name I couldn't remember. I signed every contract in my name and paid every deposit in full. She didn't ask for totals or repayment terms. She just let me do it all, like she expected it. Like, after everything, it was still my job to make sure her life didn't fall apart. But the worst part? Not once during those weeks did she ever call just to check on me. Every interaction was transactional. Did you confirm the linens? The seating chart needs editing. Never. How are you holding up, Dad? Never. Thanks. The moment that finally knocked the wind out of me came 2 weeks before the wedding, when I drove out to the venue to finalize some details with the coordinator. Lily was there with the groom's family, his parents, aunts, even a cousin or two. I walked in wearing a clean button-down, slacks, and my good boots. I'd even shaved. I was trying. God knows I was trying. When she saw me, her eyes widened, not with excitement, but with mild panic. She rushed over and whispered, Dad, can you not mention the tire shop today? Just try not to bring it up. I stared at her, wondering what version of me she saw in that moment. Was I just some scruffy man she'd outgrown? Did she truly believe her new family would love her less if they knew the truth of how she was raised? I nodded slowly, kept my mouth shut through the whole meeting. But inside, something turned. A part of me that used to believe love could survive anything, shame, distance, even pride, died a quiet death in that sunlit conference room. The groom's mother, Diana, was the type of woman who smiled with her lips, but not her eyes. Everything she said felt like it came with a warning label. At one point, she turned to me and said, Lily tells us you're quite the businessman. What kind of work do you do again? Lily stiffened. I looked at her, then back at Diana, and said calmly, I own a tire shop. Been doing it 28 years. Diana's smile tightened. and she gave a small nod like I'd confirmed her worst fears. Well, that's useful, she said, turning back to her wine. I watched Lily's face flush, and for a split second, I almost apologized just to make her comfortable. But I didn't. I stayed quiet and reminded myself that the truth doesn't need to be dressed up. It just needs to be said. Ray, my oldest friend and the closest thing I've got to a brother, saw it all unfolding before I did. One afternoon at the shop, while I was on hold with a rental company, he leaned against the workbench and said, "You know you're being used, right?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but he wasn't buying it. "She ain't Callan because she loves you. She's Callan because she knows you'll bleed yourself dry to keep her wedding from falling apart." I told him it wasn't that simple. That maybe this was my way back in, a second chance to fix something I couldn't put a wrench on. Ray shook his head and said, "Man, she don't need fixing. She needs reminding." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. She needed to remember who I was. Not who she told people I was, but who I really was. The man who raised her with cracked hands and sleepless nights, who never missed a tuition payment even when it meant skipping meals. As the wedding drew closer, the planning became frantic. Every day there was a new emergency. The florist supplier delayed shipments. The bakery had a miscommunication about the cake design. The custom centerpieces weren't arriving on time. Lily called me 10 times a day, barking orders like I was her assistant. Still, I kept moving. Part of me hoped that, when the dust settled, she'd look at everything I'd done and say the words I hadn't heard in years. "Thank you, Dad." But deep down, I knew better. Her voice never softened. Her gratitude never came. Every time I picked up the phone, I braced myself, not for appreciation, but for another request, another correction, another reminder that I was only needed when things were falling apart. One night, after a 12-hour day at the shop followed by 4 hours of wedding logistics, I came home and collapsed onto the couch. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't showered. I just sat there, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly I became invisible to the person I loved most. I looked over at the framed photo on the wall, her high school graduation. She was smiling, clutching her diploma, and I had my arm around her shoulder. Back then, she still looked at me like I was someone she was proud of. Now, I was just a name on a contract, a signature that made things happen. I didn't cry. I was too tired for that. I just closed my eyes and told myself, hold on, just a few more weeks. But in my chest, something different was growing. Not bitterness, not revenge, not yet. Just clarity. Cold, clear, and sharp. I was no longer trying to win her love. I was watching her lose mine. There's something strange about watching your own child treat you like a transaction. You start to question every memory you held sacred. Every bedtime story. Every time you wiped away their tears or stayed up with them during a fever. You wonder if they remember any of it, or if those things just blended into the background like wallpaper. I couldn't stop thinking about that as I poured more money and time into Lily's wedding than I'd ever spent on anything, including my own home. Every dollar I dropped into her dream was another layer I peeled back on this version of her I didn't recognize. The girl who used to write me notes in crayon now sent texts like a supervisor reviewing a checklist. Confirm band arrival time. Need head count for rehearsal dinner. Did you get the tent flooring resolved? I read them each night with tired eyes, too drained to be angry, too numb to care. I told myself I was doing it for closure. That maybe if I just got her through this wedding, I could walk away knowing I'd done right by her, even if she never did the same for me. The weeks leading up to the wedding blurred into a frenzy of logistics and late-night coordination. I wasn't just funding the event, I was managing it. The wedding planner who quit? I replaced her. The caterer that fell through? I hired a team from 3 towns over, paid extra to lock in the date. I coordinated the lighting crew, double-checked the tent permits, scheduled drop-offs for chairs and tablecloths. Lily never once introduced me to anyone as her father during vendor meetings. I was always Tom, like a hired hand. There was this moment, a few days before the final vendor walkthrough, when the florist, a sweet woman named Clarice, pulled me aside and asked, "So, are you the father of the bride or the wedding coordinator?" I smiled politely and said, "Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." She gave me this look, pity mixed with confusion, and patted my shoulder like she felt sorry for me. Maybe she did. I think, by then, I felt sorry for me too. The venue was a sprawling vineyard estate about an hour outside the city, all rolling hills, fairy lights, and enough pretension to choke a goat. Lily loved it. She said it fit the aesthetic, which I guessed meant it didn't look like anything she came from. It cost more than I earned in 3 months, and I paid for it in one phone call. No questions. No second guessing. The owner knew me by voice by then, and I'd become the go-between for every detail: fire safety permits, security, even guest parking. When I showed up for the final walkthrough, I noticed Lily had brought along the groom's family, but not me. I found out she was there when one of the security guys texted me a photo of the couple on the balcony. That's when it clicked. She didn't want me seen. I was good enough to pay for it all, good enough to save her big day from collapse, but not good enough to be part of the narrative she was crafting for herself. That wasn't just exclusion. That was erasure. I stopped telling Ray everything around that time. He'd started getting angry on my behalf, and I didn't want that heat in the air. But one night, after I stayed late at the shop reviewing invoices, he found me staring at a spreadsheet with red eyes and no appetite. "You look like a man burying himself," he said. I laughed dryly and told him maybe I was. He pulled up a chair, cracked open a soda, and said something I'll never forget. "You keep mistaking loyalty for love. Just because you stayed doesn't mean she sees you. You've shown up for her your whole life. What has she ever shown you lately, besides her back?" I didn't have an answer. I just nodded. My silence was the only honesty I had left. The final straw came a week before the wedding. I was on speakerphone with the band leader, confirming sound check times, when I heard Lily in the background at her end of the line, laughing with one of her bridesmaids. God, he's like a little manager elf. You give him a task, and poof, it's done. The girl laughed. Lily added, "At least he's useful for something." The call ended without me saying a word. I sat in my truck for a long time after that, staring at the dashboard, fingers gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. That was the moment it all shifted. The sorrow, the confusion, the desperate ache for approval. It melted into something cleaner. Not rage, not revenge, just resolve. I realized I wasn't going to be the quiet servant in the shadows anymore. If I was going to be invisible, I was going to choose it. On my terms. I went home that night and opened every single contract. I read the fine print, checked the cancellation clauses, marked the deadlines. Everything was in my name: venue, catering, rentals, entertainment. All it would take was a few phone calls, maybe an email or two. I didn't make them. Not yet. I just wanted to know that I could. I wanted to feel that power in my hands, because for too long, I'd given it away. I was no longer trying to earn my place at a table she didn't want me at. I was done setting plates for people who wouldn't even look me in the eye. And if the cost of her erasure was silence, then I was going to show her how devastating that silence could really be. It was almost too easy. That was the part that startled me. For all the work and noise that went into planning the wedding, all the vendors and moving parts, it only took a few calm phone calls to dismantle it all. I didn't have to raise my voice or offer a single explanation. The minute they heard my name, the name on the contracts, the credit cards, the checks, they listened. A soft-spoken man with authority. I wasn't loud. I wasn't cruel. I was polite, almost apologetic. "We'll need to cancel the lighting rental. Please withdraw the catering from your calendar. Yes, I understand the deposit is non-refundable." And one by one, the confirmations came through. Contracts voided, orders rescinded, bookings erased. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like I'd finally stepped into the role I should have played all along. Not the fixer, not the servant, but the man who decides when enough is enough. The morning I pulled the plug on the venue lighting, I got a voicemail from Diana, the groom's mother. Her voice was clipped, practiced, and unmistakably condescending. "Hello, Tom. I just wanted to confirm the valet details for the wedding. We'd prefer that our guests not be made to walk long distances. Also, I'd appreciate it if you didn't wear denim to the ceremony. We'll have photographers, and I'd like the aesthetic to remain cohesive. Thank you." She didn't even ask. She assumed. And for the first time, I didn't replay her words with bitterness or shame. I smiled. There it was. The exact type of correction Lily had come to crave. Curated, sanitized, approved. She hadn't just left me behind. She'd replaced me with people who didn't know the first thing about sacrifice but had the gall to treat me like an eyesore. The valet wasn't even my responsibility, but that wasn't the point. The point was, they thought I was lucky to be invited to a show I built from the ground up. And I'd had enough. I started canceling everything in a specific order. Slowly, deliberately, like unraveling a sweater one thread at a time. First the backup generator for the tent, then the linens, then the caterer. I watched it fall like dominoes. The band was the last one I called. They were professional, courteous, and disappointed. "We hope everything's okay," the bandleader said gently. I told him it was. I wished him luck. Then I sat at my desk and stared at the stack of copies I'd made of every contract, neatly arranged, signed by me. My signature was all over her wedding, even if my name wasn't on the program. I poured a drink, something I rarely did, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night. 2 days before the wedding, Lily called in a panic. I could hear wind in the background. She was outside, pacing, breathless. "Dad, the florist just called. She said the order was canceled. What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. She said my name twice, each time more frantic. "Did you cancel it?" I finally said, "Yes." There was silence. I could picture her frozen on some perfectly manicured lawn, realizing, for the first time, that she didn't have control over this narrative anymore. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. I waited a beat, then said, "Because you made it clear I wasn't welcome. So I decided to stay home." I hung up before she could respond. The next day, her fiancé called. I hadn't spoken to him much over the course of the planning. He always struck me as someone who smiled without meaning it. His voice was sharper than usual, strained. "Hey Tom, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We're getting calls left and right. Vendors backing out, things getting canceled. Lily's really upset. Is this some kind of mistake?" I said, "No mistake." He hesitated. "But the venue, the catering, that was all confirmed, right?" I said was. Another pause. "Look, I get that there's been tension, but this isn't just about you and her. This is about two families coming together." I smiled, not that he could hear it. "That's funny, because one of those families never even saw me as part of theirs." Then I hung up. The final blow came on the wedding day itself. I didn't leave the house. I turned off my phone and spent the morning baking, a habit I picked up during quiet weekends alone. While I rolled dough and watched the sky through my kitchen window, chaos was unfolding at the vineyard. No lights, no food, no music. Guests trickled in, confused. The groom's family panicked. Vendors were missing. Some tried to call me. Others called Lily. No one had answers. The band never arrived. The venue staff was unaware of any final confirmations. People began to whisper, then leave. What was supposed to be a spectacle turned into a spectacle for all the wrong reasons. Eventually, the groom's family walked out, humiliated, furious, done. It was late evening when I turned my phone back on. 40 missed calls, 12 voicemails. One from Diana, screaming. 2 from Lily, one sobbing, one silent, but full of noise in the background. Then a text from her. "You ruined everything. Why would you do this?" I stared at it for a long time before replying. "You didn't want anyone to know you came from someone who fixes tires." Today, they didn't. Then I powered my phone off again and went back to kneading dough. Not with anger, with peace. The first time I checked the local news that evening, I didn't expect to see anything. But there it was, buried in the lifestyle section of the paper's digital edition. Vineyard wedding ends in chaos. Vendors no-show, ceremony canceled. They didn't name names, but they didn't have to. Anyone who was there would know. Anyone who saw Lily in that white dress with mascara running down her face, barefoot on the wet grass, screaming into a phone as guests trickled out with confused murmurs. That image would be enough. A few people filmed it. Of course they did. This generation documents collapse like it's entertainment. And maybe it was. Maybe, for the ones who'd never liked her smug confidence, it was satisfying. I didn't watch the videos. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough of Lily's disappointment up close to know exactly what her devastation looked like. Only this time, I wasn't the one running to fix it. Around 7 p.m., someone banged on the door of the shop. I wasn't there. I had Ray keep an eye on things just in case someone got the bright idea to confront me in person. He told me later it was the groom himself. Looked like he hadn't slept. Demanded to speak to me. Ray didn't even open the door. Just leaned against it and said, "Man ain't here." The groom tried to bluff his way in, said he had legal grounds, said he'd sue. Ray laughed, not because it was funny, but because the guy didn't understand the world he was now colliding with. "You sign a contract, son?" Ray asked. "Because Tom did. And he canceled them fair and square." The groom didn't have a comeback. Just stood there, red in the face, before walking off with his suit jacket balled in his fist. I imagined him rehearsing speeches in his head the whole drive over, thinking he'd shame me into undoing what was already done. But shame only works on the guilty, and I'd spent too long carrying guilt that wasn't mine. Later that night, I sat on my back porch with the lights dimmed low and the hum of the crickets replacing the noise of the world. I didn't feel proud. That's not the right word for it. I felt relieved. Not because I'd hurt her, God knows that wasn't the goal, but because I had finally stopped letting her hurt me. People think revenge is about destruction, about leveling the ground to prove you can. But for me, it wasn't about the wedding. It was about her seeing the difference between love and servitude. I gave her the world, and she pawned it for approval from people who wouldn't have crossed the street to help her. I wanted her to stand there, in that empty venue, and realize who really built the world she stood on, and who could take it away. 2 days passed before I heard her voice again. It was a voicemail, no introduction, just sobbing. I sat at my kitchen table, holding my phone in one hand and a mug of lukewarm coffee in the other, listening to her unravel. "I don't know how you could do this to me," she wept. "I know I was wrong. I know I said things. But this, you humiliated me. Everyone's talking. His family hates me. He's not even answering my texts." Her voice cracked. "You ruined my life." She paused, sniffled, then whispered, "Why would you do this to me, Dad?" That last word hit different. She hadn't called me that in months. Maybe longer. I sat in the quiet afterward, staring at the phone like it might answer for me. It didn't. And neither did I. By the end of the week, the groom's family had canceled all remaining events. No reception, no dinner, no photos. Everything was refunded where it could be, but most of it was lost. Lily tried to do damage control online, but the story was already spinning. A bridesmaid posted something vague. "You don't turn your back on the people who raised you just to impress the ones who didn't." It went semi-viral. People started speculating. One commenter said, "Imagine your own dad funding your whole wedding just to ghost you the day of. Brutal." Another replied, "Sounds like she earned it." I read them all. Not because I cared what strangers thought, but because I wanted to see if anyone still remembered the value of a father who shows up, even when he's unwanted. Turns out, a few still did. When Lily finally showed up at my door, she looked smaller. Not physically, but in spirit. Her posture was slouched, her eyes tired, lips chapped, hair pulled back like she'd given up halfway through getting ready. She didn't knock, just stood there, hands in the pockets of her coat, like she wasn't sure she'd be allowed in. I opened the screen door slowly, said nothing. She blinked fast, like she hadn't planned for this part. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She didn't sit, just hovered near the doorway, her fingers twitching. "I wanted to explain," she began. I held up a hand. "No need," I said. She flinched a little, but nodded. "I deserved it," she murmured. That caught me off guard. Not because she was wrong, but because I didn't think she'd say it. "I treated you like a tool. I made you feel replaceable, and I knew what I was doing. I just thought," she trailed off. "You wouldn't fight back?" I offered. She nodded. "You never have before." We stood in silence for a while. Then I said, "I didn't do it to ruin your life. I did it so you'd remember who held you up when no one else would." Her lip trembled. "You're the only person who's ever really done that." I nodded. "I know. I wasn't angry anymore." That was the hardest part to explain to her. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted clarity. And now that I had it, I wasn't interested in rubbing salt in the wound. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to justify. And I respected that. After a few minutes, she turned to leave. Before she did, I said, "When you're ready to come home proud of where you come from, my door's open." She paused, nodded once, and walked away. Weeks passed. Fall crept in slowly, brushing gold onto the trees and sending a chill through the early mornings. The vineyard story died down, replaced by new gossip and fresh scandals. But for me, the silence remained a presence of its own. Lily didn't call again. She didn't text, didn't show up. Part of me had expected that. She'd always preferred distance over discomfort, silence over apology. Still, each day I opened the shop, flipped the sign from closed to open, and waited for the ache to pass. It didn't. It just changed shape, less a sharp pain now, more like a dull weight that settled in my chest. Not because I regretted what I did, but because the finality of it all had begun to settle in. I hadn't lost my daughter at the wedding. I'd lost her long before that. The wedding was just when I finally decided to stop pretending I hadn't. Every morning, I went through the same routine: coffee before sunrise, email checks, vendor calls, inventory. Customers came in with the usual stories: flat tires, oil leaks, check engine lights. I listened, nodded, and worked, same as I always had. But something in me had shifted. There was a quiet that followed me now, not grief, not anger, just a certain kind of clarity. I had spent my entire life being useful. That was the language I spoke, the way I showed love. I fixed things. That was my identity. But somewhere along the line, Lily had decided that being useful wasn't enough. She didn't want to be associated with the kind of man who worked with his hands, who smelled like rubber and metal and sweat. She wanted to belong to a world of clean collars and curated aesthetics. And that's fine. That's her choice. But I finally understood something vital. I didn't have to fund the bridge she used to walk away from me. Ray noticed it before I did, I think. One afternoon, he watched me finish up a tire rotation, then said, "You move different now." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what, slower?" He shook his head. "No, like you finally stopped trying to outrun something." I chuckled. Maybe I did. He leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, and said, "You know, I've known you 25 years, and I ain't never seen you let go of anything. Not even people who deserve to be left behind. That girl's lucky you even picked up the phone when she called." I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. "Yeah," I said, "but she won't get that version of me again." Ray didn't argue. He just patted my shoulder and said, "Good." A few days later, I got a message from Clarice, the florist who'd helped with the wedding before everything unraveled. She'd heard bits of the story from other vendors and wanted to check in. "Not many fathers would have done what you did," she said. "Most would have either paid and stayed silent or walked away entirely." I didn't respond right away, but after a moment, I said, "I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it to stop hurting myself." She nodded slowly. That's the kind of boundary more people need. It was the first time anyone said it out loud. Boundary. Not revenge. Not spite. Boundary. And I realized then that what I'd done wasn't about teaching Lily a lesson. It was about finally learning mine. One morning, as I was sorting invoices behind the counter, I found the old photo of Lily in her graduation gown tucked between two dusty receipts. I don't even remember putting it there. I stared at it for a long time. Her smile was wide, her eyes lit with a pride that used to feel so real. I turned it over. On the back, in her messy handwriting, "To the best dad in the world, thank you for everything." I didn't cry. I just set it back down, carefully, and whispered, "You're welcome." That photo wasn't a lie. It was a version of her that existed once, maybe still did, buried beneath the layers of pride and shame and distance. But I wasn't waiting around for that version to return. I'd made peace with the idea that she might never come back. And if she did, it'd have to be on terms that honored both of us. Not just the daughter she'd become, but the man I'd always been. About a month after the wedding, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Lily's childhood friend, Harper. She'd moved away in high school, but kept in touch sporadically. "I just wanted to say," she told me, "I saw what happened. And I remember how much you did for her. You were always there." I thanked her, surprised. She hesitated, then added, "People don't forget that kind of love, even when they pretend to." That stuck with me. Maybe Lily hadn't forgotten. Maybe she just couldn't face it yet. Maybe one day, when the noise quieted, when the opinions faded, she'd remember the nights I stayed up sewing buttons on her school uniforms, the way I held her bike steady the first time she rode without training wheels, the hours I spent in the rain at her soccer games just to be present. Maybe. But even if she didn't, I had finally learned to live without needing her to. I ended up framing that photo. Not to display it, just to preserve it. I keep it in the drawer beneath the register, a small reminder that love, even when it's broken, still mattered once. I didn't stop being her father the day she cut me out of her engagement party. I stopped being her safety net the day she decided my love came with no limits. But I'm still a man with a name, a history, and a life built by hard hands and honest work. That's something I'll never be ashamed of again. I fix tires. I run a shop. And I raised a daughter the best way I knew how. Whether she remembers that or not is no longer my burden to carry. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone you loved, if your work, your hands, or your history became something they wanted to hide, then this story is for you. It's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your worth when someone you raised tries to erase it. If that hit home, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. Your story matters too, and we're listening. See you soon in the next story.